A humble arrival. The scent of polished mahogany and fresh-cut lilies hung in the air as Sasha Carter stepped into the grand entrance of the Whitmore Hotel. Despite its prestigious reputation, the lobby bustled with a tranquil energy that felt worlds away from the clamor of the city outside. High, vaulted ceilings stretched above her, and every fixture, from the marble floors to the golden chandeliers, spoke of legacy and sophistication. Dressed casually in dark jeans, a cozy sweater, and sneakers, Sasha looked like a tourist who might have wandered in by mistake. She glanced around, unnoticed among the glistening surfaces and posh decor that were now hers. She had a purpose, after all. Sasha had made this unannounced visit intentionally, hoping to get a raw, unfiltered glimpse into her hotel's operations. This wasn't just a business move for her. It was personal. Only a month ago, she'd signed the final papers, officially taking ownership of Whitmore, an establishment with a reputation for catering to the city's elite. A lifetime of hard work, resilience, and determination had brought her here. Yet she found herself grappling with the thought of what truly lay beneath the hotel's polished image. Her decision to visit in casual attire stemmed from her desire to observe how her hotel treated guests who didn't fit the typical image of wealth and privilege. She approached the front desk, where an employee offered her a polite nod, not recognizing her. But before she could continue, a voice, smooth and authoritative, broke through the lobby's quiet hum. "Excuse me, ma'am," said a man approaching with quick, assertive strides. He was tall and immaculately dressed, his tailored suit impeccable and his slicked-back hair in place. His gaze was sharp, assessing her from head to toe in one sweep. Sasha turned, meeting his eyes calmly, though she could sense his surprise and hesitation at her appearance. She already knew who he was: Ethan McAllister, the hotel's general manager. She'd read his file thoroughly, praised for his management acumen and unrelenting standards for the Whitmore's image. However, his reputation for being selective about clientele had caught her attention. She suspected that Ethan valued certain standards that weren't always based on integrity. Today would be the test. "Yes, can I help you?" Sasha replied politely, maintaining a pleasant expression. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his polite smile didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I was about to ask you the same thing," he said, a note of coolness creeping into his tone. "Are you a guest here?" Sasha chuckled softly. "I am indeed, or at least I intend to be," she answered, her gaze steady. He studied her again, a touch of disdain now visible in his expression. "I'm afraid, ma'am, that the Whitmore maintains a specific atmosphere, a refined space for a particular clientele." "Is that so?" She responded with calm curiosity. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Ethan's lips twisted slightly, as though he were trying to find the most palatable way to proceed. "We cater to individuals who value a certain exclusivity," he explained, his tone patronizing. "I'm sure there are other hotels that may be more in line with your preferences." Sasha's chest tightened with a flash of anger. She held back a retort, determined to maintain her composure. This was why she'd come without pretense, without the grand introductions or fanfare that could have avoided this exchange. She wanted to see how guests were treated when no one was watching, especially those who didn't look the part. She was about to respond when another figure emerged from the shadows near the concierge's desk. Gregory Lane, the hotel's CFO, was an older man with a warm, inviting face and an approachable demeanor. He wore a look of mild confusion as he approached, noticing the exchange from afar. When his gaze settled on Sasha, recognition dawned, and his eyes widened in alarm. "Miss Carter," Greg exclaimed, his tone filled with relief. He glanced sharply at Ethan, whose face instantly paled. I didn't realize you had arrived." Ethan looked between Sasha and Greg, his expression one of growing horror. "Wait, she's Miss Carter." "Yes," Greg replied sharply, his tone a mixture of reprimand and shock. "This is Miss Sasha Carter, the Whitmore's new owner." A hush fell over the lobby as other staff members and guests turned their attention toward the interaction, whispering among themselves. Ethan's face went through a series of changes: surprise, then fear, and finally a cold, strained attempt to appear apologetic. "Miss Carter," he began, his tone shifting from dismissive to obsequious. "I had no idea. I truly apologize for the misunderstanding." Sasha's expression didn't waver as she looked him in the eye. "A misunderstanding," she repeated softly, her voice calm but laden with meaning. "What exactly did you misunderstand?" Ethan faltered, his gaze flicking around the room as though searching for an escape. I simply didn't recognize." She raised her hand to silence him, feeling the weight of everyone's stares on her. "Mr. McAllister," she said, her voice measured but resolute, "I arrived today without pretense because I wanted to experience how every guest is treated, not just those who are recognized by staff. I'm looking for a hotel where all guests feel welcomed, regardless of appearance or social status." She noticed a flicker of embarrassment in his eyes, and a pang of satisfaction sparked in her. Ethan, usually so assured in his judgment, was now floundering. Ethan swallowed, trying to compose himself. "Miss Carter, I assure you, I was only treating me based on appearance," she interrupted, arching an eyebrow. "Let me be clear, Mr. McAllister. Discrimination has no place in this establishment, and neither does judgment based on appearances. This is a place of luxury, yes, but it must be a place of respect above all else." The strength in her voice rippled across the room. She could see other employees nodding slightly, some exchanging glances. A sense of understanding and relief seemed to pass among them, and Sasha could sense that this was a shift they'd been waiting for. Ethan opened his mouth to respond but hesitated, words failing him. Finally, Sasha turned to Greg, her tone softening. "Mr. Lane, I'd like a full report on the hotel's recent operations, with a focus on guest relations and management practices. I want to understand exactly what I'm stepping into." Greg nodded, an unmistakable look of approval in his eyes. "Of course, Miss Carter. I'll prepare everything for you immediately." Turning back to Ethan, she offered him one final, resolute glance. "And Mr. McAllister," she said, her tone steely, "we will be evaluating every aspect of this hotel's leadership. I expect a thorough explanation of how you've been conducting your management practices." With that, she turned and began walking deeper into the hotel, feeling the weight of her own authority settling comfortably on her shoulders. This place was now under her direction, and she intended to transform it into a sanctuary of dignity for everyone who walked through its doors. Behind her, Ethan stood frozen, his once confident facade shattered, a man who had just realized the limits of his control. As the whispers resumed around him, he remained motionless, aware that his future at the Whitmore hung by a thread. Unmasking the Whitmore, Sasha spent the next morning in her new office, a sprawling space on the top floor of the Whitmore Hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the city skyline, the bustling world below casting long shadows over her desk as the morning light poured in. She had barely settled in, but the files on her desk were already stacked high, each one representing a piece of the Whitmore's operational puzzle. Yet, as much as the hotel's architecture and design boasted elegance, she knew there were other layers hidden beneath the surface. Greg Lane had placed a meticulously organized file on her desk, a welcome package that detailed essential statistics, profit reports, and employee structures. But Sasha noticed something unsettling as she skimmed through the data. There were inconsistencies, subtle but notable. It wasn't just a matter of numbers, it was the patterns. Budgets appeared inflated, particularly in areas that seemed unrelated to direct guest experience. Maintenance expenses showed a consistent upward trend over the past 2 years, despite the hotel already boasting pristine facilities. Sasha leaned back, deep in thought, piecing together fragments of what she had experienced and observed. Ethan McAllister, the manager, had not only shown himself to be judgmental, but was also likely playing a role in these inflated numbers. She couldn't help but think of the encounter in the lobby, the way he'd been quick to assume, quick to dismiss. If he treated guests like this, How did he regard the rest of the staff? Her mind drifted to the hotel's employees, wondering how many had been impacted by his arrogance and perhaps greed. Just then, Greg knocked lightly on her door before entering. He had an apologetic smile, as though aware of the burden she was taking on. "Miss Carter," he began, "I've compiled a list of recent financial discrepancies you might want to examine." Sasha took the folder from him and raised an eyebrow. "Thank you, Greg. I already spotted a few questionable entries," she said, opening the folder. "These maintenance charges in particular, do they seem a little excessive to you?" Greg cleared his throat, his face growing tense. "They are. I've actually been uncomfortable with a few of those entries myself, but the previous owners, well, they rarely questioned Ethan's reports. The profits were steady, so they left him to his own devices." "Until now," Sasha replied, her tone thoughtful. She glanced over at Greg, weighing his sincerity. "And what's your perspective, Greg? I'm interested in how things have been managed here, from your point of view." Greg hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Honestly, Miss Carter, I've had concerns for a while. Ethan is efficient, but his methods, they don't sit right with everyone. He's selective with guests and staff alike. It's as though he's built this hotel on exclusivity, rather than hospitality." Sasha studied him, sensing a well of untapped frustration in his words. "I want you to know, Greg, that I'm here to change that," she said, her voice steady. "From now on, we will build a culture rooted in respect and genuine hospitality. We're not a gated community. We're a place for people to feel welcomed and valued." Greg looked visibly relieved. "It's refreshing to hear that, Miss Carter. Many of us have been hoping for a shift." They were interrupted by a hesitant knock on the door. A young woman peeked in, her expression cautious yet hopeful. Sasha smiled warmly and motioned for her to enter. "Miss Carter, I'm Claire," the woman said, her voice slightly wavering. She looked like she gathered her courage just to speak. "I work at the front desk, and I heard about yesterday's incident." Sasha smiled, her eyes encouraging. "Yes, Claire. Please, go on." Claire wrung her hands nervously. "It's just, Mr. McAllister is very particular about who he considers suitable guests. We've seen him turn people away based on things like their clothes or, well, their appearance. The rest of us have had to follow his lead." Sasha's jaw clenched slightly, but she remained composed. "Thank you for telling me, Claire. Your honesty is important to me, and I want you to know that things will be different moving forward. No one should feel judged or unwelcome here." Claire nodded, a faint smile appearing on her face. "Thank you, Miss Carter. It's reassuring to know you're listening." As Claire left, Sasha returned to the stack of reports, each document further reinforcing her commitment to dig into the hotel's operations. It was no longer about profits or prestige, but about creating an environment where people were respected, regardless of wealth or social status. She spent hours combing through every line, every transaction, making notes of discrepancies. Later that afternoon, Sasha called a meeting with Ethan. She knew that to get to the root of these issues, she'd have to address the matter head-on. When Ethan entered, his usual confidence seemed dimmed, as though he understood this was no ordinary meeting. He offered her a polite, if slightly strained, smile. "Miss Carter," he greeted, taking a seat across from her desk. "You wanted to discuss some concerns." "Yes, I do," Sasha replied, her tone cool. She gestured to the files spread out in front of her. "I've been reviewing the financial records, Mr. McAllister, and there are several irregularities that concern me. Could you explain why the maintenance budget is so unusually high?" Ethan's expression barely flickered, but she caught the briefest flash of unease in his eyes. He quickly composed himself. "The Whitmore prides itself on maintaining world-class facilities, Miss Carter. Maintenance costs are simply a part of that standard." She arched an eyebrow. "Certainly, but I've cross-checked those expenses against actual work completed, and the numbers don't add up. Additionally, I found unexplained vendor fees and charges attributed to staff morale." Care to explain what those funds were used for? Ethan's face flushed slightly, but he remained calm. As the manager, I often cover various costs that may not be recorded precisely in the line items, he said with an attempt at nonchalance. It's simply a part of ensuring things run smoothly. Smoothly, she repeated, her gaze unyielding. I disagree. Transparency and accountability are not optional here, Mr. McAllister. From what I see, it appears there's been a disregard for both. His posture stiffened, and for a moment, Sasha glimpsed the real Ethan, the man beneath the polished surface. I understand your concerns, Miss Carter, but you have to recognize that managing a luxury hotel like the Whitmore requires flexibility, he replied, his tone clipped. I've maintained a high standard for years. This hotel is what it is today because of my leadership. Sasha felt her patience wearing thin. And yet, she said, her voice calm, the Whitmore's prestige has come at the cost of its integrity. Your leadership has fostered an environment that's more focused on appearances than genuine hospitality. That ends now. Ethan's mask slipped slightly, and his eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting that the Whitmore's success isn't due to its exclusivity? I'm saying that exclusivity doesn't require arrogance or disregard for others, Sasha replied, her voice steady. The success of this hotel will be based on quality service, respect for our guests and staff, and transparency in all operations. Ethan's gaze hardened. And if I disagree with your vision? Sasha leaned back, meeting his stare evenly. Then you'll find yourself no longer a part of it. For a tense moment, silence hung between them. Finally, Ethan nodded, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. Understood, Miss Carter. I'll comply with your changes. Good, Sasha replied, not trusting his concession, but knowing this was only the beginning. I'll be conducting regular reviews to ensure that the Whitmore standards align with our new values. As he left, Sasha allowed herself a brief sigh. She could sense that he was only agreeing to her demands because he felt cornered, but she was determined to see through every measure she put in place. Ethan might resist, but she knew she had the staff on her side. And with Greg's support and the employees' willingness to share their experiences, she felt confident that the Whitmore's toxic culture could be uprooted. In the following days, Sasha made it her mission to speak personally with as many employees as possible. She encouraged them to share their experiences without fear of retribution. The stories that emerged painted a picture of a workplace where people felt stifled, judged, and unable to voice their concerns. Many recounted instances of being unfairly reprimanded or humiliated by Ethan, who had created an atmosphere of exclusivity, not just for the guests but among the staff as well. Each conversation only fueled Sasha's resolve. She began implementing changes, starting with a code of conduct that emphasized respect, transparency, and accountability. Anonymous feedback boxes were placed in common staff areas, and open forums were scheduled where employees could discuss concerns directly with her. The changes were small but symbolic, signaling to the staff that the Whitmore was moving in a new direction. For the first time in years, employees began to feel hopeful. The rigid air of elitism was slowly lifting, replaced by a budding culture of inclusivity. Sasha could sense a shift in morale as smiles became more genuine, conversations more open. Her presence became a daily reminder that change was possible, and she took pride in seeing the beginnings of a team that valued integrity over appearances. But she knew Ethan would not remain quiet for long. The undercurrents of resistance were still there, simmering beneath the surface. Sasha prepared herself, knowing that her mission to transform the Whitmore would require unrelenting dedication, and perhaps one last confrontation with the man who had controlled the hotel's image for far too long. Seeds of change. Over the next several days, Sasha could feel the Whitmore's rhythm shifting, albeit slowly. The staff, initially cautious about her presence, had started to warm up to her, recognizing the sincerity behind her efforts. Sasha spent her days observing operations firsthand, from the quiet early mornings to the bustling evening shifts. She worked side by side with housekeepers, shadowed the front desk team, and even took a shift with the Bellops, determined to understand every level of the Whitmore's ecosystem. Yet as she walked through the hotel, offering support where she could, Sasha felt Ethan's shadow trailing her. He maintained a cool, polite demeanor whenever they crossed paths, but his eyes held a simmering resentment that made it clear he was not done fighting for his version of the Whitmore. And Sasha knew that beneath the pleasantries, Ethan still harbored ambitions of reclaiming control. It was late one afternoon when she noticed Claire, the young front desk clerk who had initially voiced her support, standing alone in a corner near the staff lounge. Claire's posture was tense, her face etched with worry, and she looked up, startled, when Sasha approached. "Is everything all right, Claire?" Sasha asked gently, her voice carrying genuine concern. Claire hesitated, looking over her shoulder before responding. "I don't want to get anyone in trouble, Miss Carter, but something strange has been happening." Sasha's interest piqued. "Go on." "It's just that ever since the changes started, some of us have been singled out," Claire murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan has been especially hard on anyone who's spoken to you or who's openly supportive of the new policies. It's like he's marking us." Sasha felt a surge of anger, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for telling me, Claire. I promise I'll handle this, but in the meantime, please keep sharing your concerns. The last thing I want is for anyone to feel unsafe here." After Claire left, Sasha returned to her office, where Greg was waiting, his face a mix of relief and apprehension. "Miss Carter, I thought you'd want to see the most recent audit findings," he said, handing her a fresh folder filled with documents. Sasha flipped through the pages, skimming over notes, tables, and figures that highlighted a pattern of misappropriated funds. The audit findings detailed thousands of dollars redirected into maintenance and staff morale expenses that never quite seemed to reach their intended targets. Some expenses were neatly justified, buried under countless small charges meant to avoid detection. But collectively, they painted a damning picture. "It's worse than I thought," Sasha murmured, shaking her head. "And this goes back years. Ethan has been skimming funds and manipulating the books, all while enforcing this exclusive facade of the Whitmore." Greg nodded, his expression grim. The previous owners likely saw the profits and assumed everything was in order. They trusted Ethan's management, and to be honest, he was careful enough to keep the books just barely within an acceptable range. "Well, not anymore," Sasha replied, closing the folder with a resolute snap. "It's time to confront this head-on. Ethan's influence ends here." That evening, Sasha made the decision to call a meeting with the entire staff, from housekeeping to management. She wanted everyone to hear directly from her that changes were not just promises, they were her commitment. As she walked toward the ballroom, where the meeting was scheduled, she could feel the weight of her mission settling on her shoulders. This was her chance to set the tone and establish trust with the people who would be the heart and soul of her new vision for the Whitmore. The ballroom was filled with murmurs as employees gathered, each carrying their own hopes, fears, and uncertainties. Sasha took her place at the front, taking a moment to observe the faces before her. She saw a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, apprehension and cautious optimism. And in the back, she spotted Ethan, arms crossed, his face a mask of indifference. Sasha cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice carrying a warmth that immediately softened the tension. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I wanted to speak with each of you personally, to explain my vision for the Whitmore." She paused, letting her gaze travel across the room. "When I first took over, I was struck by the hotel's reputation for exclusivity, but I believe that luxury and respect are not mutually exclusive. I believe we can have a world-class establishment where every guest and every staff member is treated with dignity." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Sasha noticed a few skeptical glances. She continued, her voice firm. "I want to be clear. We are changing the culture here. There will be no tolerance for discrimination, intimidation, or favoritism. This hotel will be a place where everyone feels safe and valued. The room was silent, save for a faint cough or a rustling of papers. Sasha took a breath, steadying herself for the next part. I also want to address something else. I know some of you have felt pressured or intimidated for supporting these changes. If anyone here feels threatened or mistreated, know that I am here to listen, and action will be taken. No one should feel afraid to speak up. At this, a wave of nods and murmurs swept through the crowd. Several employees glanced at one another, relief evident in their eyes. Sasha glanced toward Ethan, who stood in the back, arms folded tightly across his chest, his face unreadable. She could sense his disdain, his refusal to accept her authority, but she met his gaze without flinching. After the meeting, Sasha stayed behind, allowing employees to approach her if they wished. One by one, they came forward. Bellhops, housekeepers, even a few department managers, each sharing their own experiences, their own stories of unfair treatment, and their hope that things would finally change. By the time the ballroom had emptied, Sasha was left with a renewed sense of purpose, along with a deepened understanding of the Whitmore's challenges. But her optimism was short-lived. The next morning, she received a message from one of the hotel's most important clients, Mr. Conrad Hayes, a media mogul whose regular stays at the Whitmore were celebrated for their publicity. Rumor had it that Ethan and Mr. Hayes shared more than a professional relationship, with Ethan catering to every whim of the demanding guest, regardless of its impact on staff or resources. Mr. Hayes had requested a private meeting with her, and Sasha could sense the undertone of entitlement, even in the brief message relayed by her assistant. She knew Ethan was somehow involved, likely trying to turn influential clients against her. Sasha agreed to the meeting, determined to address any issues directly. She arrived at the designated suite a few minutes early, giving herself a moment to steel her resolve. Mr. Hayes opened the door himself, dressed in an expensive robe, his expression already radiating impatience. "Miss Carter," he greeted coolly, eyeing her up and down. "I understand you're the new owner of the Whitmore." "That's correct, Mr. Hayes," Sasha replied with a calm smile, entering the suite. "What can I help you with today?" Mr. Hayes gestured for her to sit, though he remained standing, a clear display of authority. "I've been staying at this hotel for years, and I expect a certain standard," he began, his voice dripping with disdain. "Ethan has always ensured that my needs are met, no matter the cost." Sasha's smile didn't waver. "I appreciate that you've been a loyal guest, Mr. Hayes, and I intend to maintain the Whitmore standards. However, I believe that our standards should apply to all guests, not just a select few." He narrowed his eyes, his tone growing icy. "Miss Carter, do you know who I am? My business brings a significant amount of attention to this hotel. I expect to be accommodated accordingly." Sasha took a slow breath, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Hayes, I respect your importance as a guest and the value you bring to the Whitmore. But my goal is to create a hotel where every guest feels valued, not just those with influence." His jaw tightened, and she could see the irritation in his eyes. "Let me be clear, Miss Carter," he sneered. "I don't appreciate your interference in the way Ethan has managed this hotel. If you're not willing to cater to my needs, I have other options." Sasha's smile remained steady, but her voice sharpened. "And I have no intention of compromising the integrity of this hotel for anyone, Mr. Hayes. I believe that respect is a standard everyone deserves." Mr. Hayes stared at her for a long moment, his face a mask of indignation. Finally, he gave a dismissive wave. "Fine. We'll see how long this little experiment of yours lasts." As she left the suite, Sasha felt a sense of pride settle in her chest. She knew standing up to influential clients could come at a cost, but she also knew that the Whitmore's legacy depended on more than just profit margins. It depended on principles, and she was determined to see those principles honored. But she also knew this wouldn't be the last battle. Ethan's connections ran deep, and there would be others like Mr. Hayes who resented the changes. However, as she made her way back to her office, Sasha resolved to keep pushing forward. She had made promises to her staff, and she was determined to keep them, no matter the resistance she faced. With each passing day, she felt the Whitmore's heart beating stronger, its foundation shifting beneath her hands. And as long as she stayed true to her vision, she knew she could transform this place into a sanctuary of respect and genuine hospitality, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. Confronting shadows. A tension-laden silence filled the Whitmore Hotel in the days following Sasha's meeting with Conrad Hayes. Rumors had spread quickly, as they always did, whispering of her confrontation with one of the hotel's most influential clients. Her refusal to bend to his demands had sent a message that was as thrilling to some as it was threatening to others. Sasha could feel the atmosphere shift, a mix of anticipation from those eager for change and unease from those accustomed to the old ways. But even as the whispers multiplied, she noticed subtle signs of resistance emerging around her. Her memos regarding the new code of conduct were conveniently lost in the chain of distribution. Training sessions she'd scheduled were mysteriously canceled without her knowledge, and her requests for basic operational reports were inexplicably delayed. Each obstacle bore the invisible signature of Ethan, whose influence among the staff, particularly those in management positions, ran deep. Late one evening, as Sasha reviewed the latest audit findings in her office, her assistant Clara knocked softly on the door. The young woman entered, carrying an expression that mixed concern and urgency. "Miss Carter," Clara began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I thought you should know. There are people within the staff who are planning to resist your changes. They're organizing, quietly, but they're gaining support." Sasha's eyes narrowed as she listened. "How did you find out about this, Clara?" Clara hesitated, clearly reluctant to implicate herself further, but she continued. "Some of the staff members who support you have been warning each other. They're worried about retaliation if they openly show their loyalty to your vision, and they've started hearing rumors that Ethan is behind it." Sasha nodded slowly, her mind turning over Clara's words. "Thank you for telling me. It couldn't have been easy, but I need to know these things." Clara nodded, glancing over her shoulder nervously before leaning closer. "There's something else. I overheard Ethan saying he was going to call in some favors with local media. He's planning to spread a story about how the new management is, well, lowering the hotel's standards." Sasha felt a flash of anger, but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Clara. I'll handle it from here." As Clara left, Sasha took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She'd anticipated resistance, but this was a reminder of just how entrenched Ethan's influence truly was. His hold over the Whitmore ran deep, and dismantling it would be more than just a matter of policy changes. It would require a strategic dismantling of his web of connections. Determined, Sasha picked up her phone and called Greg, who answered almost immediately, sounding groggy but alert. "Miss Carter." "Greg, I apologize for the late call," Sasha said, keeping her tone steady. "But I need you to meet me in my office as soon as possible. We have a situation." Greg arrived 20 minutes later, his face etched with concern as he settled into a chair across from her desk. Sasha explained Clara's warning, watching as his expression turned grim. "Ethan has always been resourceful," Greg admitted, "but resorting to the media. That's bold, even for him." "Boldness comes naturally when one feels threatened," Sasha replied. "Ethan sees me as an outsider, a threat to his control over the Whitmore. He won't go down without a fight." Greg sighed, his gaze thoughtful. "You're right, but it's more than just control, Sasha. Ethan's reputation is tied to this place, and so are his alliances. If he can't run things his way, he'd rather see the hotel crumble than support your vision." The weight of Greg's words hung heavily in the air, and Sasha felt a chill of understanding settle over her. This wasn't merely about professional pride for Ethan, it was personal. She would need to approach this battle carefully, knowing that her every move would be scrutinized, and any mistake could be used against her. But she was undeterred. "We'll need to stay a step ahead, Greg. If Ethan's using his influence to undermine us, then we'll counter with transparency." Greg looked at her, a glimmer of surprise in his eyes. "Transparency." "Yes," Sasha replied, her tone firm. "We'll make sure everyone, staff, guests, and even the public, sees the changes we're implementing. Ethan's power lies in secrecy, in twisting the narrative to his advantage. If we make our intentions clear and invite people to see the transformation themselves, we can rob him of that weapon." Over the next several days, Sasha doubled down on her efforts, working tirelessly to counteract Ethan's attempts to disrupt her progress. She organized open staff meetings, inviting employees to share their feedback and voice concerns directly. She sent out regular updates on the changes being implemented, from the new training programs to initiatives aimed at creating a safer, more inclusive environment. Sasha also took a bold step, inviting members of the local press for an exclusive tour of the Whitmore to discuss her vision and the steps she was taking to modernize the hotel. She shared her plans for elevating service, emphasizing the importance of respect and inclusion as core values. The press responded with cautious interest, recognizing the significance of her approach in an industry that rarely embraced change. Articles began to appear, each one highlighting the Whitmore's new direction and Sasha's commitment to fostering a culture of dignity for every guest and employee. But despite her efforts, she knew it wouldn't be enough to win over everyone. As expected, Ethan struck back, using his network to cast a shadow of doubt over her leadership. Rumors surfaced, suggesting that Sasha's changes would cheapen the hotel, turning it from an exclusive haven for the elite into a mass-market establishment. The words were carefully chosen, stoking fears that the Whitmore would lose its reputation, and by extension, its loyal clientele. One afternoon, as Sasha walked through the lobby, she noticed a group of employees gathered in hushed conversation near the concierge desk. Their whispers stopped as she approached, their eyes darting away nervously. Sasha could feel the weight of their uncertainty, the struggle between loyalty to their former manager and the hope for a fairer workplace. Determined to address the growing tension, Sasha called a meeting with Ethan. She knew that facing him directly would be risky, but she had to confront him before his influence destabilized the entire staff. Ethan arrived at her office looking as self-assured as ever, though Sasha could see the guarded glint in his eyes. He took a seat across from her desk, crossing his legs with casual defiance. "Miss Carter," he greeted, his voice laced with a thin veneer of politeness. "I hear you've been making quite the impression." "Thank you, Ethan," Sasha replied, unruffled. "Though I suspect our definitions of impression might differ." Ethan's smile turned cold. "I only meant that your changes have certainly stirred the pot. And as you can imagine, some of us are concerned about the direction you're taking." Sasha held his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. "Concern is natural with any change, Ethan. But there's a line between concern and obstruction." He raised an eyebrow, his eyes glinting with a hint of mockery. "Obstruction? Surely you don't mean to accuse me of that, Miss Carter." Sasha took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Ethan, I know you have strong opinions about the Whitmore's identity, and I understand that these changes may feel like a threat to that. But I want to make something clear. This hotel is more than just a brand. It's a place where people come to feel valued, and that includes our staff." Ethan's polite mask slipped slightly, his smile growing colder. "Respectfully, Miss Carter, I've been here long enough to know what keeps this hotel afloat. Clients don't come here to feel valued. They come here for exclusivity. If we dilute that, we risk losing everything." Sasha felt her patience waver, but she kept her tone steady. "Exclusivity doesn't have to mean elitism, Ethan. We can offer a luxury experience without sacrificing kindness, respect, or integrity. In fact, I believe that's what will set us apart." For a moment, Ethan looked at her as if she were naive, his expression laced with disdain. "I see," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "You want to create some kind of sanctuary. Well, I hate to break it to you, But sanctuaries don't make profits. Sasha met his gaze, undeterred. I disagree. I believe a place that treats people with respect, that fosters loyalty among its staff and trust with its guests, will thrive. And I intend to prove it. Ethan's expression darkened, his tone growing icy. You're playing with fire, Miss Carter. You might think you can just waltz in here and change things, but you don't understand this world. People don't want to be treated the same. They want to feel superior. That's the business of luxury. Sasha took a slow breath, allowing his words to settle. She knew he was wrong, but she also knew he believed every word he'd just said. Thank you, Ethan, she said finally. I think we've made our positions clear. And I want you to know that I'm fully prepared to stand by mine. He regarded her with a look of contempt, rising from his seat. Then you should be prepared for the consequences. As he left, Sasha felt a surge of both frustration and resolve. She knew Ethan would only intensify his efforts, but she was prepared. She returned to her plans, making notes for her next steps. Additional meetings with department heads, updates to staff protocols, and further outreach to strengthen her connections with the community. If Ethan wanted a fight, he would get one, but on her terms and with her integrity intact. The next morning, Sasha received an anonymous message from a member of the staff, warning her that Ethan was planning to hold a secret meeting with several of his loyalists. It was a gathering meant to reinforce his authority and encourage those who still doubted her vision to align with him. Sasha was both disheartened and unsurprised, but she took it as an opportunity. She drafted a memo, scheduling an all-staff meeting to discuss the hotel's future and laying out the values and direction she envisioned. When the day of the meeting arrived, Sasha stood at the front of the ballroom, facing a room filled with both allies and skeptics. She spoke with conviction, sharing her vision for a place where everyone, regardless of appearance or status, was treated with dignity. She emphasized the role of each staff member in creating a welcoming atmosphere, a place that would attract guests not just because of luxury, but because of warmth and respect. After she finished, there was a moment of silence before one of the housekeepers, a woman named Maria, stood up and began clapping, slowly at first, then louder as others joined in. Sasha felt a swell of gratitude as she saw the growing support around her. Ethan's loyalists remained silent, their expressions steely, but Sasha sensed a shift, a tide that, while not fully turned, had begun to flow in her favor. She left that day feeling stronger than ever, with a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than a job, it was a mission. The Whitmore was changing, and though the path ahead was fraught with challenges, she knew she would rise to meet them. No matter how many battles Ethan waged, Sasha was ready. She would not allow him to define the Whitmore's future, for she knew it belonged to everyone who called it home. End of Part 4. In the next part, Sasha's determination leads her to deeper alliances and some surprising revelations as she continues pushing for change. Ethan's resistance will grow even fiercer, but so will Sasha's resolve as she unearths a hidden truth within the Whitmore's legacy. You said, continue with Part 5 more unique and lengthy. ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. Here is Part 5, where Sasha deepens her alliances, discovers unexpected allies, and unearths surprising truths about the Whitmore's past. Her struggle with Ethan escalates, but new revelations give her the strength to continue transforming the hotel. Part 5. Allies and Revelation. The day after her all-staff meeting, Sasha arrived at the Whitmore with renewed energy. The response from many of the employees had been encouraging, and she felt the beginnings of a shift in the hotel's culture. But she also knew that Ethan's supporters were still working in the shadows, holding onto their ideas of exclusivity and resisting her vision. Her commitment to change, however, was unshaken, and she was determined to root out the remnants of elitism that had clouded the Whitmore's values for so long. That morning, as she entered her office, she found a small stack of papers on her desk with a note in Greg's neat handwriting. Thought you might find this interesting. Curiosity piqued, she flipped through the documents and realized they were old staff rosters, some dating back decades. Each page contained names, roles, and annotations, along with notes about special projects, internal staff events, and a few handwritten comments. Sasha paused as she noticed one name scrawled repeatedly across several pages. Thomas Whitmore. Thomas Whitmore, she remembered, was the hotel's founder, a man revered in local circles for his contribution to the industry. The Whitmore had always been known for its hospitality and attention to detail, a reputation he'd built from the ground up. But Sasha had never seen these notes before, nor had she known about Thomas Whitmore's original vision for the hotel. As she read, a particular entry caught her eye. Dated nearly 40 years ago, it read, "Our vision is to create a space where every guest, from any walk of life, feels valued and welcomed. Luxury isn't about exclusivity, but about offering comfort, warmth, and dignity to all who enter. This place is a sanctuary, a testament to kindness." Sasha felt a surge of emotion as she read his words. They echoed her own vision, her determination to make the Whitmore a place of genuine hospitality. She'd come to this hotel with a mission, but discovering that Thomas Whitmore had shared similar ideals brought her journey into sharper focus. His words strengthened her resolve and validated the direction she was taking. Determined to learn more, Sasha asked Greg to meet her in her office. He arrived a few minutes later, looking intrigued as she held up the pages. "Greg, where did you find these?" she asked, gesturing to the old documents. Greg smiled, a hint of nostalgia in his expression. "In the hotel's archives. There's a whole room on the lower level, filled with documents, old plans, even guest books from decades ago. Most people forget it's there, but I thought you might appreciate the history." "I do," Sasha replied, glancing at Thomas Whitmore's notes again. His vision for the hotel, this emphasis on dignity and inclusivity, is exactly what I'm trying to rebuild here. And it makes me wonder, Greg, what happened? How did we stray so far from his original purpose? Greg sighed, leaning back in his chair. Over time, ownership shifted, new management came in, and priorities changed. Ethan, for instance, wasn't here when the Whitmore was first thriving under those values. By the time he became manager, the hotel was already drifting toward a more exclusive image, and he capitalized on that shift, building his own version of luxury, one that was, let's say, more restrictive. Sasha nodded, her mind racing. Ethan's focus on exclusivity had indeed created an air of prestige around the Whitmore, but it had also alienated many, including the staff. Now, armed with Thomas Whitmore's original vision, Sasha felt even more emboldened to reclaim the hotel's legacy. "Thank you, Greg," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "This history, it means so much, and I think the staff would be inspired by it as well." With a nod, Greg left and Sasha began drafting a plan. She wanted to incorporate Thomas Whitmore's vision into the new direction she was establishing. It wasn't enough to tell employees they were valued. She wanted them to feel it in their daily work. As she worked, her phone buzzed with a notification, a message from an unknown number. She opened it, her eyebrows knitting together as she read. Anonymous message. "Be careful. Ethan is moving fast. He's planning to meet with the board to push you out. He claims your changes are destroying the Whitmore's brand." Sasha's heart sank, but she quickly regained her composure. She'd expected Ethan to escalate, but this confirmed he was willing to go to any lengths to secure his vision for the hotel. Her phone buzzed again, and another message popped up. Anonymous message. "Not everyone agrees with him. Some of us believe in what you're doing. We'll support you." The words felt like a lifeline, a reminder that despite Ethan's influence, there were still allies within the Whitmore. She would need them now more than ever. The following day, Sasha requested a meeting with the board, knowing she had to address Ethan's accusations head-on. She prepared meticulously, bringing documentation of her changes, the positive media coverage, and a copy of Thomas Whitmore's original vision statement. She knew the stakes were high, and she wanted the board to understand that her mission was rooted in the hotel's own history, not just her personal ideals. As she entered the boardroom, she could feel the tension in the air. Ethan was already seated, his arms crossed, a smug look on his face. The other board members looked uneasy, glancing between Sasha and Ethan with thinly veiled discomfort. "Thank you for meeting with me," Sasha began, addressing the board with calm confidence. "I understand there have been concerns about the direction I'm taking the Whitmore, but I want to assure you that my vision is aligned with the values Thomas Whitmore established when he founded this hotel." She handed each board member a copy of Thomas Whitmore's notes, watching as they read his words, surprise and curiosity crossing their faces. One of the fundamental principles he outlined was that luxury doesn't have to mean exclusivity. Rather, it's about offering warmth and dignity to all guests. And I believe that, especially in today's world, this approach will set us apart. Ethan scoffed, unable to hide his disdain. "With all due respect, Miss Carter, those were idealistic musings from decades ago. This is a new era, one that demands a focus on exclusivity to maintain our status." Sasha met his gaze, unflinching. The Whitmore's status comes from its legacy, a legacy of hospitality and respect for all people. Times have changed, yes, but people still value places where they feel genuinely welcomed. That's a luxury that transcends wealth and appearance. One of the board members, a middle-aged woman named Ms. Davenport, nodded thoughtfully. "Ethan, if the Whitmore was built on the values of inclusivity, perhaps returning to those roots isn't as misguided as you think. There's something refreshing about the idea of a luxury hotel that prioritizes respect and dignity." Ethan's face tightened, but he forced a polite smile. "Of course, Ms. Davenport, but we must also consider the clientele we've cultivated over the years. They expect a certain exclusivity." Sasha seized the moment. "I agree that our clientele has evolved, and I respect the importance of tradition. But what I'm proposing is not to abandon quality or sophistication. Rather, it's about redefining luxury to include genuine hospitality. This doesn't alienate our existing guests. It attracts new ones who value respect alongside elegance." Her words resonated with several board members, who exchanged nods of approval. It was clear that Thomas Whitmore's legacy carried weight, and Sasha had given them a perspective they hadn't considered before. The meeting concluded with the board expressing cautious support for Sasha's vision, though they urged her to proceed carefully, knowing the impact on their brand was a delicate balance. Ethan's smugness had faded, replaced with an expression of restrained fury as the board members filed out. As Sasha prepared to leave, Ethan approached her, his face set in a tight smile. "You think you've won them over with your little history lesson. You're playing with fire, Miss Carter." Sasha looked him in the eye, undeterred. "You underestimate the power of genuine hospitality, Ethan. It's not about winning or losing. It's about doing what's right, and I think we both know that's something you've forgotten." Ethan's gaze turned icy, but he said nothing, storming out of the boardroom with an air of indignation. Sasha watched him go, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just about policies and profits, it was about reclaiming the Whitmore's soul. That evening, she met with several of the staff members who had expressed support, including Claire and Maria, the housekeeper who'd applauded her in the staff meeting. They discussed new ideas for improving guest experience, brainstorming ways to integrate more personal touches and make every guest feel valued. Claire suggested introducing a guest feedback program, one that allowed guests to share their stories and highlight staff members who made a positive impact. Maria proposed small, welcoming gestures, like personalized notes in guest rooms, crafted by the staff. They discussed training programs that emphasized empathy and warmth, qualities often overlooked in traditional luxury settings. By the end of the evening, Sasha felt a surge of optimism. She wasn't alone in this battle. Her allies were growing, and their dedication was proof that Thomas Whitmore's vision could be revived. She made plans to highlight these initiatives publicly, showcasing the Whitmore's transformation in the media. If Ethan intended to tarnish her image, she would counter it with a clear and authentic story of change. The next day, Sasha and her team launched the Whitmore Way Initiative, a set of values and practices centered around respect, empathy, and excellence. They invited local media to witness the unveiling, sharing Thomas Whitmore's original vision statement as the foundation of their new direction. The story resonated with readers, and within days, the Whitmore became the talk of the city, a hotel known not just for its luxury, but for its heart. As she watched the response unfold, Sasha knew there would be more battles ahead, but she also knew she had unearthed something powerful: the spirit of the Whitmore, a legacy worth fighting for. The hotel was transforming, and with every step, Sasha felt more confident that she was bringing it back to its rightful purpose. Legacy restored. As Sasha walked into the Whitmore on the morning of the Whitmore Way launch event, she was greeted with the smell of fresh flowers and the soft buzz of activity. Staff were busy making last-minute preparations, and Sasha noticed a lightness in their expressions, an enthusiasm she hadn't seen before. The launch of the Whitmore Way had been meticulously planned to reflect the heart of her vision, a renewed commitment to hospitality based on respect, warmth, and inclusivity. Over the past few weeks, media coverage of the Whitmore had flourished. Guests had shared stories of their memorable experiences, staff had received appreciation for their dedication, and the city's curiosity about the new Whitmore had grown. But despite the success, Sasha knew Ethan wasn't finished. He was still scheming, still weaving his web of influence in the shadows. She had heard rumors that he was rallying influential clients, investors, and even some staff members to his cause, creating a narrative that framed her changes as a threat to the Whitmore's true identity. It was only a matter of time before he made his next move. Later that morning, Sasha was in her office when Greg entered, his face tense with concern. He held up a letter, and Sasha immediately recognized the sharp, formal script. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for the letter. "It's from the board," Greg replied, his voice filled with trepidation. "They're requesting an emergency meeting. Today. Apparently, Ethan has submitted a formal complaint, claiming that your changes have alienated several of our valued clients and endangered the hotel's financial stability." Sasha took a steadying breath, her hands tightening around the letter. She knew this was Ethan's last-ditch effort to undermine her leadership. If he could sway the board, he could potentially halt the Whitmore Way initiative, or worse, remove her from her role entirely. "I see," Sasha replied, her voice calm but resolute. "Thank you, Greg. It looks like we'll have to address this head-on." Greg gave her a reassuring nod. "Sasha, you've shown everyone here what real leadership looks like. No matter what Ethan says, your impact is clear. I'll stand by you." Sasha smiled gratefully, feeling the weight of Greg's words settle into her resolve. She knew that people like Greg, Claire, and Maria, along with many of the staff, believed in her vision and would support her. Now she had to convey that same conviction to the board. As she walked toward the boardroom later that day, Sasha took a moment to compose herself, recalling Thomas Whitmore's vision and the purpose she'd discovered in his words. She wasn't just defending her position. She was fighting for the Whitmore's legacy. Inside, the board members sat around the polished table, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. Ethan sat to the right, his face composed, but his eyes gleaming with a smug sense of victory. Sasha met his gaze briefly, unflinching, and took her seat. The chairman, Mr. Lawrence, cleared his throat, addressing the room. "Thank you for joining us, Miss Carter. This meeting was called in response to serious concerns raised by Mr. McAllister. He claims that your recent changes, though well-intentioned, have led to significant unrest among our core clientele and staff." Ethan leaned forward, his voice laced with false diplomacy. "I've been here for years, ensuring the Whitmore remains a symbol of exclusivity and prestige. I'm concerned that if we continue down this path, we'll lose what makes this hotel truly unique." Sasha looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each board member. She could sense their uncertainty, but she also saw the glimmers of openness in a few of their faces. "With all due respect, Mr. McAllister, Sasha began, her voice steady, the exclusivity you refer to has come at a cost. It's not just the guests who felt this. The staff, those who dedicate their time, energy, and pride to the Whitmore, felt it too. Many were made to feel that they were simply here to serve an image, not a mission. That's not the legacy Thomas Whitmore envisioned. A murmur rippled through the room, and Sasha continued, holding up a copy of Thomas Whitmore's original vision statement. This is the founding principle he wrote decades ago, a vision that sought to create a place of warmth and respect. This isn't my personal mission, it's the legacy of the Whitmore. She could see several board members nodding slightly, and she pressed on. The Whitmore Way initiative has already received a positive response from guests and media. People are drawn to authenticity. And if we adapt our values to embrace inclusivity and respect, we're not abandoning exclusivity. We're enhancing it. We're becoming a sanctuary that values everyone. Ethan's face twisted with disdain. With all due respect, Miss Carter, idealism won't pay the bills. The Whitmore needs a specific type of clientele, and if we start appealing to everyone, we lose our identity. Sasha met his gaze, her voice unwavering. The Whitmore's identity has always been its commitment to excellence, not exclusion. And I believe that excellence shines brightest when everyone is treated with dignity. Ms. Davenport, one of the more open-minded board members, spoke up. Ethan, I think you're overlooking an important point. In today's world, reputation is built on values that people can trust. The Whitmore's new direction isn't just about inclusivity. It's about creating a lasting legacy. Ethan's face tightened, but he masked his frustration, his voice calm but his words barred. I see, Ms. Davenport, but I question whether we can afford to take such a risk. Our most loyal clients have already expressed concern, and alienating them could be disastrous. The chairman turned to Sasha. Miss Carter, do you have a response to this concern? Sasha took a breath, nodding firmly. Yes, I do. I've already spoken with several clients who have embraced the Whitmore Way and see it as a refreshing approach. They're not just guests, they're patrons who believe in our values. And the staff, many of whom were reluctant at first, are more motivated, more invested. They feel seen and respected. As she spoke, the door opened, and several familiar faces walked in. Claire, Maria, and a few other employees. Greg, who had been standing near the door, nodded to her, his eyes filled with quiet encouragement. The board looked surprised but intrigued as the employees took their places at the back of the room. Sasha gestured to them. These are the people who make the Whitmore what it is. They've come to support this vision because it's not just mine. It's ours. They've experienced the changes firsthand, and they're here to tell you what the Whitmore Way means to them. Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly but filled with conviction. I've worked here for years, and under Ethan's management, I was told who was worthy of respect and who wasn't. But Miss Carter showed me that respect shouldn't be conditional. She gave us a voice, and I've seen the difference it's made, not just for us, but for our guests. Maria followed, her voice steady and clear. We've seen how this new vision affects people. Guests are happier. Staff are happier. It's a change we all needed. The Whitmore Way is more than just a set of rules. It's a promise. And we believe in it. The board members exchanged thoughtful glances, visibly moved by the employees' testimonies. Sasha felt a swell of gratitude as she watched her allies stand up for the values they all shared. Finally, the chairman spoke, his tone thoughtful. Ethan, while we appreciate your concern, it seems that the staff and even some of our clients are in favor of this new direction. Miss Carter, we'll support you in continuing the Whitmore Way initiative. However, we expect full transparency in its execution and regular updates on its impact. Sasha nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I assure you that my team and I will make this transition one that honors the Whitmore's legacy and serves its future. Ethan's face darkened as the decision was made final. He rose from his chair abruptly, his expression a mask of fury. If you think this will work, you're all making a grave mistake. Sasha held her ground, meeting his gaze one last time. The only mistake, Ethan, would be to let fear keep us from growing. The Whitmore will thrive, and it will do so with integrity. With a scornful glare, Ethan left the room, his influence at the Whitmore finally shattered. Over the next few months, the Whitmore Way initiative flourished. The hotel became known for its personalized service, where guests from all backgrounds felt welcomed and valued. Word spread, drawing a new clientele who appreciated the Whitmore's values. Staff morale improved, and the team grew closer, united by a shared purpose. The staff took pride in Thomas Whitmore's original vision, feeling connected to a legacy that was now alive in every aspect of the hotel. Sasha watched as employees who had once feared change now embraced it, stepping up with enthusiasm to make the Whitmore a place where kindness and excellence went hand in hand. On the anniversary of her ownership, Sasha hosted a grand event at the hotel, inviting staff, guests, and members of the community to celebrate the Whitmore's transformation. Greg raised a toast, honoring Sasha's courage and vision. As laughter and music filled the ballroom, Sasha felt a profound sense of peace and pride. Standing by the grand windows, Sasha looked out over the city lights, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced countless challenges, but in reclaiming the Whitmore's legacy, she had found her own purpose. The hotel was more than just a building. It was a sanctuary of respect, an embodiment of values that would outlast her tenure. In that moment, surrounded by the people who had fought beside her, Sasha knew she had fulfilled Thomas Whitmore's dream and created something enduring, something real, a place that truly felt like home for all who entered.